to the Best Damn Podcast. I did not mean to actually hit the live button yet, but fuck it. We'll go ahead and go with it. I want to thank you guys for joining me. Ask you to please add, follow, check us out. Instagram, Facebook, Best Damn Podcast, Twitter, The Real Best Damn. And wherever you're watching this from, wherever you catch this from, make sure to hit the like, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and share the link. Sharing is like the best way to really support. It helps me to get it out there to new people. And so please share it, help me get it out there. And if you would like to donate and support to the channel, you can do that by going to PayPal, Cash App, Facebook Messenger Pay, or joining us over on Patreon. The links are in the chat tonight for the live, and they are also in the description and will be pinned at the top of the comment section. So I've got a pretty interesting one tonight. It's kind of a continuation from, or really not a continuation, but, building upon, the show I did the other day. And I'm going to be kind of sticking with this over the next couple of days, because what I'm leading up to is I really got this, I guess I got a testimony of my own. I'm wanting to kind of put out into the ethers, but I feel like it's really important to hit like a lot of other things first, because I feel like so many people are being affected by similar things, especially people within this community, especially people in, spiritual communities online, conspiracy communities online, truther communities. We're facing a level of spiritual warfare that, I think it's unprecedented. At least in my lifetime, it's unprecedented. It's like the battle has really intensified. The battle has intensified, and it's like the line has been drawn in the sand. And you're seeing all types of people that are now like coming out, which I feel like is really cool. But all types of people that are now like coming out, and they're saying, hey, I was once an occultist, or, I was once a Satanist, or I was once this, I was once that, and they're kind of renouncing all of that, And some people have these great stories of how Jesus saved them and all of that. And, I'll be honest with you, about half the time when I see these things, I get a feeling like a lot of these people, and, I'm not to bash nobody, but I get a feeling like a lot of these people, they weren't true occultists, or they weren't truly in satanic cults sometimes, But here's the thing. And the reason I called this dealing with the devil, you don't have to join a satanic cult, or you don't have to write your name in blood in order to sell your soul. You don't have to do that. Matter of fact, most people, they sell their soul incrementally, A lot of us do that. We sell our soul bit by bit, piece by piece, little by little, And the way that we do that is by compromising ourselves, compromising our morals, compromising our values. And if you guys are in the chat, if you would, just let me know if you can hear me and see me, if we're coming in clear. But we do this by compromising our morals, compromising our values, bit by bit. So many people now place value on material things, on money, on, on the desires of the flesh, instant gratification, on our selfish desires. And on our carnal nature. That it takes away from our spiritual self. It takes away from, our principles, because we're willing to, we're willing to alter our decision making. We're willing to change the way that we would go about something. We're willing to, put ourselves in a less than polished position, in order to make money, in order to, have the things that we want. And this is like really, ultimately what society has, as a whole, elected to do. Now, if you guys look in the zeitgeist too, like, whether you're one of those people that surf TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, one thing that you have seen, and you've probably seen this, is like how the new age concepts have become incredibly trendy, right? Now, if you'll remember some of the writings of the grandfather or modern day father of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, right? He had this letter to Mazzini in 1871 titled The Three World Wars. Now, within this letter, titled The Three World Wars, he outlines the world conflicts that we have all seen, right? From World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution, World War II, to the rise and fall of the Nazis, right? And into World War III, which was and is what we're seeing now with the Muslim Arabic world against Zionism, right? Essentially creating a social cataclysm that pushes us to the point of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion, And we also see this facing off of Christianity, nihilism, atheism, all these different ideologies that we really see clashing now. If you look at like the political landscape between the left and the right, that's a really, really good indicator on what Pike was talking about would happen and what would play out, right? And that's what we're seeing, And what's pretty crazy about all of it is, it's designed to show the origin of savagery of atheism, for one, resulting in bloody turmoil. And for two, it is designed to bring both sides to mutual destruction, right? Christianity and atheism and the nihilists and so on, And without compass or deistic spirit, and this is, I'm quoting Pike here, without compass or deistic spirit, and it will allow those disillusioned with Christianity. And it's like, and if you look at like what's going on with Christ consciousness movements and shit like that, you can really, really start to grasp, how this is being evolved and how this is being pushed onto all of us, right? So with the whole Christ consciousness concept, right, it's taken away that deity that is Jesus, right? So without the deistic spirit, without no compass, no guide, no deity, right, they're able to indoctrinate us into the pure doctrine of Lucifer. Right? And this is according to Albert Pike. This isn't an opinion. This is his letter. This is fact. This is the mission. And when you look at the zeitgeist, like I said, one thing that I think has become incredibly evident is that we are being having and experiencing a mass indoctrination into Luciferianism. I mean, a lot of people, I think they just got this like misnomer when it comes to Luciferianism, and they're like, they don't really understand, what real Luciferianism is. They have this like fucked up idea about it, where they believe it's like, incredibly dark, incredibly evil, right? They a lot of times I believe they confuse it with, like really dark versions of Satanism, you know? But that's not what being a Luciferian is at all, actually. You know, Lucifer is the light bearer, right? He's the light bearer. If you look at the founding fathers, right, of the United States, and you know, the original members of the Bavarian Illuminati, these were Luciferians, right? And if you notice, they were intellectuals, right? They were intellectuals. They had progressive ideas and ideologies. And what they were trying to do is to bring about liberty, right? Enlightenment, and create a modern day utopia. You know, and this is where that whole ideology of the New World Order comes into place. It's like, you know, bringing in this this renaissance, if you will, you know, of art, of, you know, thought, of, you know, intellectual science, all of it. You know, this is the real true version of Luciferianism. You know, they believe they're intellectuals. They believe, you know, about enlightenment. It's the universalism too, right? That universal principle where we're all one, right? We're all one. Now, I know, like, a lot of people don't want to accept, you know, that, and like on its face, and like taking it at face value. That's what it is. But you know, nothing is ever just like face value. You know, Luciferian, you know, beliefs being no different. You know, there are certain guiding principles to Luciferianism that, you know, a lot of people believe, in Luciferianism, there's the thought process of not violating another's free will, right? So that's why you see in a lot of times you're giving your consent through a lot of different things, right? Through, you know, predictive programming and symbolism and things like that, right? That's because that's a Luciferian principle, you know, and it's like if you, you know, and you're kind of looked at too as well as like, is if you don't take the time to learn something, if you don't take the time, you know, to have the knowledge, to have the gnosis, you know, that's why you're the profane, right? You kind of like get what you deserve. You know, you're not allowed to just attack people just because you want to attack people, right? It's like they violate you first and then you're allowed to return the favor, you know? So when we look at Luciferianism too, and, you know, it's like, it's dressed up as this, you know, idea of liberty, the utopia, all of this, right? This intellectualism, this progressivism, you know? But underneath, you know, it's just like every other occultic belief, right? You know, this is leading you down a path that's ultimately going to, you know, twist your mind, shatter your psyche, fragment you, and it opens up spiritual doors to allow demonic and archonic entities, you know, to feed off you, to attach to you, and to attack you. You know, and see, we get this dressed up, this version of Luciferianism, and it's like, just kind of like think about it. Like if you look at the zeitgeist now and you look at like, you know, what, you know, I'm sure within your algorithms on TikTok and all these different platforms, you know, you see things about the law of attraction, right? Manifestation, you know, symbolism, predictive programming, the New World Order, all these different things. These are, you know, it is Luciferian, you know, the Kabbalah, you know, all of this is being brought right into plain sight. You know, these mysteries. It starts off as, you know, the indoctrination through Gnosticism usually, right? That's usually where people scrape the surface at, is through Gnosticism. You know, they get this Gnostic beliefs, and I did a video with Gary Wayne some years back. I had him on a few times actually. You know, and we were talking about Christian Gnosticism, and he was basically saying that there's no such thing as Christian Gnosticism, right? You know, because these Gnostics, you know, it's polytheism. It's just, dressed up, right? And they're believing in this demiurge, that everything within the physical reality is a part of the demiurge, right? And that we're trapped here, we're trapped here, and that, the spirit, we're children of the spirit, and that's where, the true Father comes from. And it's not Yahweh or Jehovah or anything like that in the Gnostic beliefs, right? It's the ineffable and inexpressible one, right? It's basically that the God or the source is so powerful and so big and so all-encompassing and omnipotent and omnipresent that a name can't describe it, because all names come from it, right? Words can't describe it, because all adjectives, all nouns, all descriptions are within it, right? So a name like Yahweh, or a name like Jehovah, or a name like Jesus, or, so on and so forth, none of these, are able to encapsulate, the God of the Gnostics, because it's ineffable, it's inexpressible, right? It's beyond what we can wrap our heads around and fathom, and although I do feel like that's a very accurate, depiction of what God would be like, when we look at the Bible, it says otherwise, right? It says, that God actually does have a name, and multiple names, matter of fact, multiple names, in Jesus or Yeshua representing salvation, right? And we'll get into some of that, as we move forward, but the Gnosticism is usually where, this kind of like we break into all of this. I mean, and look at things like, Abraham Hicks, right? How many people, like you can get people that are not even into, like super conscious shit or spiritual shit at all, right? But they'll dig Abraham Hicks, right? And this, this manifesting, this practice of manifesting, and everything is, and it's really crazy too, to kind of like see it happening. But it's like, I feel like also we are being conditioned while we're going through this, indoctrination into the Luciferianism. We're also being conditioned to bury our heads in the sand in a lot of ways, right? How many different, beliefs and schools of thought do you see where people are like, oh, I create my own reality, right? Through these manifestation and law of attraction, all of that, right? And because of that, they believe that they can't even, recognize any negativity, that they can't even look at anything negative. They can't even talk about anything negative. They can't even, they're not able to even be aware of like negative things that are taking place, because that will affect, their reality, which I think it's laughable when somebody says I create my own reality, because you obviously do not. You create your own choices, decisions, and you have consequences for those choices and decisions, but you don't create your own reality at all, actually. It's a shared collective experience, You have no sway over what other people are seeing, and you have no sway over what you're seeing. You're seeing the same thing as everybody else. You're just able to make free will choices within said reality. Karma, well, yeah, I mean, and when we think about karma is another one too, right? Everybody believing in karma now, It's like we're put in these, a lot of the Eastern, Buddhism and Eastern mysticism and all of that, right? This all falls into the same shit, man, right? Theosophical, beliefs, right? Theosophy, right? This falls right into bed with the occult as well, And there's so many people, and it's like we're not really understanding that we're actually, and this is what's pretty wild about it, because it says like, as in the days of Noah, so it will be in the end, right? And if you remember, like in the days of Noah, First and foremost, like the world was corrupt as fuck, right? It was incredibly corrupt. It was like the most corrupt it had ever been. There were Nephilim running around, giants devouring and killing mankind, and the fallen were here, and we were worshiping all these idols and all of this. We were just foul. And then look at what we are today, and you can see the comparison, right? A lot of the technology that the governments of the world use is, in fact, Nephilim technology, right? Fallen angel technology. They're opening, portals to the fucking bottomless pit with CERN, They're messing with things that they have no business messing with, right? That are probably altering time and space and the fabric of reality and everything, within this creation, and probably even has the ability to create and wreak havoc and some sort of destruction, right? On planet Earth with the things that they're tapping into. We're using quantum computers. In this quantum realm, you have to think, the D wave for one, the black cube, isn't it funny how the black cube Saturn worship, right? Which, you think about the ancient, past where the gods were on the earth, right? And we walked with the gods, right? They called it the golden age, right? All right, which, and this was the golden age of Saturn, And now we have Trump talking about the new golden age now, right? And we're unveiling and rolling out all of the quantum computers. We're unveiling and rolling out all of the artificial intelligence. We're unveiling and rolling out all the nanotechnology and the biohacking, And this is all Nephilim and fallen angel technology, right? And this is like I said, as in the days of Noah. And it even makes you wonder, the Tower of Babel, what actually was that tower, right? That allowed us to ascend to heaven to try to overthrow God. Was it some sort of genetic alteration, that allowed us to raise consciousness in such a way, I don't know, but I really do wonder, what we did then, But I do see that we are on the same path today, right? We now have the ability to make designer babies. We now have the ability, to clone if we want. We can grow organs and shit out of nothing. They're putting, and this is like proven now. We're putting fucking human meat into fast food and shit. It's like, it's cannibalism. All these things that we're told not to do in the Bible. It's like we are all doing now. We're sexually immoral as not just as a nation, but as a planet. You got divorce rates higher than they've ever been. You've got marriage rates lower than they've ever been. And you think about the agendas, and it's like homosexuality and all of this, and it's like, and I'm not here to knock you if that's your thing, but isn't it strange that every time that a nation actually legalized gay marriage, they fell. Every time an empire legalized gay marriage, it fell. And I challenge you to go look this up. Rome, all of them. Anytime they accepted that, the empires fell. They were conquered. And it's like I believe I don't care who people love. I don't care what people do. If they want to cut their cock off and, dress up like a girl or whatever, that's on them. But the fact that we target children with this shit now, it's like, and remember, like, Christ said, to harm one of these little ones, right? it'd be better to have a millstone hung around your neck and be thrown into the bottom of the ocean, right? Like, it's a bad news bears for those that harm the kids. And we have this epidemic now of child trafficking, human trafficking, right? All of these things where we're like literally, organ harvesting, where we're, and it's like, these are abominations, right? These are atrocities against mankind. And like on a fucking level that, it's hard for most people to wrap their heads around. It's like a lot of you guys, it's like been with me on this journey for some years now. And whether you've been with me or you've just been on this journey by yourself for some years now, then you very much understand that, pre-COVID, if you tried to tell somebody about human trafficking, if you tried to tell somebody about organ harvesting and all of this shit, they would call you fucking nuts. They would think you were insane for talking about those things. They would absolutely call you a liar and say that the government doesn't do that that's not going on, that hospitals don't do that, right? They would just think that you were absolutely ridiculous and that you needed mental help. Akron, Ohio, nice to see you, man. Appreciate you listening from Akron, Ohio. I'm here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Go Buckeyes. And it's like, now we have, it's like becoming common knowledge, and it's like, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, honestly. It's like, yeah, we're all starting to wake up in one way, right? It's like, okay, cool. We're all accepting now, that we have an elite class of people, a ruling class of people, an oligarch class of people that are, using babies' foreskin and injected in their fucking lips, their stem cells and all of that to as well as, ingesting adrenochrome and all these different things, and a lot of them are partaking in acts that, are so heinous, that they can't even be mentioned or described on one of these platforms because they would get the video fucking taken down, But they're participating and, they're all PDFs, if you know what I'm talking about. Pedo PDFs, right? All of them. And they defend it too. Even fucking Donald Trump, everybody thought that he was, the hero of the day and that he was going to, release all the Epstein shit. And then he comes out and he's like, nah, and you find out that he's on the list too. And it's like Elon Musk was literally telling you that. I seen him in an interview, but he's all part of it too. There is no good guys, amongst that class of people, just to keep it real. They're all in on it. But Trump's a Jesuit. He went to Fordham University, and it's even said that during his first term, he converted to Judaism, And I mean, that's why he's probably done more for Israel than any other president in the history of the United States, right? It's make Israel great again. He is an absolute Zionist shill, And I hate to tell you that, if you don't believe that, what's up, bro? A lot of people have a hard time accepting these things, There's some people that are just so brainwashed and diehard when it comes to these politicians that they just can't fucking accept, that if you say that he's wrong, and that he done something, he fucked up, or he's one of them, then all of a sudden, you're a liberal, a puppet, and da 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 da, And you got these people that defend him even when he's doing shit that, you know, is blatantly obvious that he's controlled opposition. You know? Blatantly obvious he's controlled opposition. You know, I knew that during his first term. He came out and he fucking, you know, within 1 month, he you know, faked the bullshit chemical attacks on Syria, dude. You know, same shit Obama did. You know, the same playbook. Didn't even switch it up. You know, it's like, oh, yeah. There you go. He was the one who fucking coined Operation Warp Speed and actually rolled out the vaccines. You know, it's like people forget these fucking things. Or what about January 6th? You know, that was most definitely crisis acting, by the way. You know, on my Patreon, those that, you know, support the channel and all that, you know, donate, each month I send links. I got private playlists, uncensored videos. I've got hundreds of hours of the shit, right? And one of my favorite, you know, private videos I've done is on January 6th, right? Where we see the exploding blood packets and the fucking movie glass and all of it. It's like they're not even wearing real fucking police badges. And he was encouraging people to come out. You know what I mean? He was encouraging them, like, come on out. You know? You know, you got Maria Abramovic, you know, which is a spirit cooking sack of dog shit that endorses him, you know, multiple times. You know, I actually have the shorts here on YouTube. You can go check them out. I've got a few of them where she talks about him being, you know, the great magus, the great magician, you know, that he's exactly what is needed to you know, wake up the world. You know, and that's what's happened too. It is. That's what's happened. You know, it's like a culture shock, you know, or a shock to the system of society. You know, and I think it's necessary and I think it's needed, but also, you know, we got to ask ourselves. It's like, yeah, it's great that people are aware of a lot of the shit that's going on, but also, you know, and when nobody's going to jail for these crimes, you know, as what has actually happened is just the normalization of pedophilia. Just wondering. Right? If nobody's actually going to jail, you know, have we actually been awakened to anything? You know, has there actually been any progression or any change, or has it just been normalized? You know? And that's what bothers me. That's what really bothers me. Because that's what I believe has happened, is the normalization of corruption, the normalization of pedophilia, the normalization of secret societies and, you know, adrenochrome and child trafficking and all of it. It's like been normalized now. It's like it's just accepted that this class of people are into this shit, you know, and that if you want to be a part of that class, whether it's celebrity, influencer, whether it's athlete, politician, etc., right, then you're going to have to do those things too. You know? And how many different celebrities and all of that, like I just listed, come right out and tell you that they sold their soul. Every last one of them. They don't hide it. You know? They don't hide it anymore. It's out in the open. And this is like what the Bible talks about. Right? In the last days. Like, you know, that, you know, the people, like, they're bold, right? They're arrogant towards God. They don't repent of their sexual immorality and their witchcraft and their idolatry. They don't give a fuck. You know? They come right out and say it. It becomes normalized. Our society becomes so evil and dark, and it's normal. You know? And our children are being indoctrinated into this. We have fucking drag queens that come in Cincinnati and read books to kids. You know? Preschoolers, toddlers. It's weird as fuck. You know, it's like, what? Why are we allowing this shit? You know? And you have like the religious people that are so conditioned too, right? They're indoctrinated in such a way that, you know, like they believe that Israel is God's chosen people, right? Which it is, you know. But if you understand what the actual etymology of the word Israel means, you know it's not a satanic political state, you know, run by Satanists. It's not that. You know, Israel is it's God's chosen. It's God's people. It's not a satanic nation. You know, Isis, Ra, Elohim, or El, right? Isis representing the divine feminine, Ra representing the masculine, right? And this also represents, you know, the mind, you know, and the mind and the body, or the mind and the soul. And it's like, once you have these two in balance, then it's El, right? Which is God. It brings out the God within you, right? Or you tune into God within you. I mean, that's, you know, that's what the compound of this name actually means. You know, it's being in balance with the mind, right? And the spirit, you know, and that's what brings, you know, the Spirit of God out within you. You know, being in balance with the masculine and the feminine. And it's like everybody now, it's like, and this is what's crazy. I can remember when I was doing this shit, you know, back in 2015, 2016, you know, I would get Q&As, literally, like, the emails come in by the thousands, dude. People asking questions, wanting to know, and having a hard time grasping or believing, you know, a lot of the stuff like that, you know, that I was talking about. And now it's like people are literally telling me, right? They're like telling me what's going on, you know? That's the difference. You know, it's like, and sadly too, you know, there's not a lot of people out there that even know what they're talking about, but everybody appears to be talking now. You know, and it's not about what a person understands, or the quality of the person or their content, right? It's just like, you know, whoever's got the loudest opinion wins. You know, whoever's got the loudest opinion wins. You know, we're allowing ourselves to be indoctrinated into, you know, a system that, you know, honestly, and if you think about this, if, you know, and if we look at like the etymology of, you know, in the book of Genesis, and I've talked about this, right? We were made in the image of the Elohim. Elohim in this particular verse means supreme magistrates, right? These are the celestial entities. These are, you know, the luminaries. These are the angels, the watchers, right? So we're made in the image of them, right? They are the ones who created us, right? An image means a phantom, a projection, an illusion, an idol, right? So when it says not to worship false idols, right? Idolatry and idol worship, it's talking about yourself. You're the idol. You know, you're the graven image, right? You were made in the image of the Elohim, right? Graven means a dead image. You're the dead image, you know? This is the system of death, right? Your body, your physical body isn't the life in you. This is the graven image. This is the idol. And think about all the new age concepts of like, thinking you're God, thinking you're God. Like I said, this is just like as in the days of Noah, dude. It's no different, right? It's our arrogance and our ego, right? I ain't worshiping nothing outside of myself. I'm not worshiping or bowing down to any gods, right? Which is Satanism, by the way, right? Satanism is, believing that you are your own God. It's all it is, And if you think about what Lucifer, Satan did, right? He placed himself on the throne of God. What are you doing when you're believing that, you're God or you are your own God, or that you're not worshiping anything outside of yourself? Huh? See, when you get it fed to you through the new age shit, it sounds really good, don't it? It's like, fucking right, man. And I've fallen for all of this, is the thing, Like, I believed it all wholeheartedly. It's like, it took me getting incredibly humbled and, experiencing really, really dark shit. I got involved in really, really dark shit, I'm not saying that that'll happen to you, but I do know that, that alone, these principles, these schools of thought alone, they open up spiritual doors and they allow you to be susceptible to attack, And there is a spiritual war going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether you're aware of it or not, And every time we're out of a state of grace, we allow ourselves, to be susceptible to that attack. See, we don't have, we can't see, we see 0.00001% of the electromagnetic light spectrum, We can't see infrared, ultraviolet, anything. That's why, like, when we use cameras, full spectrum cameras and all this shit, we're always catching different entities and electromagnetic energy and all that. Because, there are multiple dimensions inhabiting the same space that you're operating in. It's a multifaceted, multidimensional reality. You're a multifaceted, multidimensional being, And that's what those 7 chakras are. You're inhabiting multiple dimensions all at once. And you have that antenna that's communicating, with the spirit, with the source at all times. And that's why, there was an agenda to destroy that, right? With the graphene oxide. Because that graphene, with its magnetic properties, guess where the magnetic pole of your body is? So it went straight there, destroyed that antenna to God, That way you couldn't communicate. Think about it, everything that we fucking do, the fluoride in the water and, all the microplastics and all of this shit, it's all meant to destroy that spiritual antenna to keep you from, being able to tune in to the right station, which is the source. And even think about the whole concept of Kundalini anyways, right? This is serpent energy. This is serpent energy. When you have a Kundalini awakening, like a lot of people don't understand, a lot of people freak the fuck out. Some people think that their third eye is open and they think they've had a Kundalini awakening, but I can tell you this, when you actually have one, you feel it. Physically, consciously, like you feel it. You open up in a different type of way that you've never been open before, And you can almost feel that rush of the that sacred secretion and all of that, like rising up, you know. But see, when that happens, though, you know, and this is why a lot of people, you know, they say, you know, like, especially too, like people that's been abused and shit like that. You know, most of our lives you know, we're used to kind of like exerting ourselves and our energy to create balance within the room, you know, that we're in, you know, say that, you know, we make ourselves bigger and smaller and all of that energetically, right? Especially as children and shit. And we finally open up, right, with that kundalini, right? You know, and, you know, this is the, you know, the new age shit, right? This is that same shit, you know. When that finally pops open, you know, then all of a sudden our energy is able to flow in a more free form. It's not contained within the vessel anymore, right? It's not contained within the vessel anymore. You know, and a lot of time when people have that awakening experience, that Kundalini awakening, they can't quite keep their soul in their body anymore, their consciousness in their body anymore, because they're so used to, you know, overextending themselves, right, and overextending their energy, you know, out towards others to compensate for other things, you know, that it happens naturally. You know, and when you're open like that too, it's allowing entities to feed on you as well. You know, you have no protection, you have no defense against any of these things, and every bit of you is wide open to allow, you know, vampiric entities to drain you of your life force. You know? I think a lot of people don't understand, you know, how powerful sex is as well, right? And the tantric energy, and, you know, we create these astral ties and these astral cords to all the different people that we sleep with as well, you know? And because of that, you know, there are a lot of people that are literally, they're leaking energy in ways that they can't even imagine, right? To all the different people that they've slept with. They've created these ties, and a lot of times, you know, especially in today's, you know, world, we don't get closure and shit like that whenever a relationship ends, you know? It's like people just kind of, you know, a lot of times, you know, one night stands and all of this. So it's like there's this connection made, and then, you know, it's never properly closed. There's never, you know, proper closure to, you know, to that connection. So that connection stays open, and then you're connected to all the people that they're connected to, right? And through that connection, whatever the fuck they're doing, whatever the fuck they're into, is going to start to pull on you and affect your energy as well, right? So it's like you're poisoning yourself, you know, through the people that you're engaging with, you're having sex with. And it's like, if we're not willing to protect our energy and protect ourselves and value ourselves, then, you know, what are we willing to do? You know, it's like you're going to have, and see, and there's another thing, like you have like all the yoga and shit like that, you know, it's incredibly popular today as well, right? It's like, you know, we're being mass indoctrinated into these systems, right? And people don't know what people don't know what's lying on the other side of all of this. These stretches and practices, same thing. They open you up in particular ways and allow access to your energy, you know? And a lot of them are, you know, a lot of yoga teachers and shit like that usually are, you know, very cultish. You know, fuck, you go to a lot of YouTubers, they're very cultish. You know? Anybody that's ever trying to tell you that, you know, and you see this a lot, but, you know, anybody that's ever trying to convince you, you know, that you need to disconnect from everyone within your life, right? Like, that's usually a key indicator that, you know, that they're probably, you know, some sort of cult or something like that. And like, we see this a lot. You know, I used to be in part of an online community when I was younger, you know, and that was like one of the things, you know, I would notice, and I notice this in a lot of spiritual communities, you know. It's like, I'll see husbands and wives leave each other, right? Separate from their families because, they're now awakened, right? God's calling them in some other direction, God's calling them to have an affair, or God's calling them to move across the country and leave their family. And usually the guru or the leader of, whatever one of these cults are, right, can never be questioned, can never be criticized, right? Can never be held accountable in any way, shape, or form, because if you try to, they'll just flip it around on you and say, like they'll use that psycho babble against you, to make you feel as if, you're just attacking them because of envy or blah, blah, blah. It's like, so much of this shit goes on. We have this incredible oversaturation, of, creators on all the platforms as it is, Like it's to the point to where there's not even really like, there's not really a lot of meaning or fellowship or, any of that, in communities anymore. I can remember that there was a point in time, when you belonged to an online community, you actually had like fellowship with that community, like you knew the people in the community, you would know the creator even, or, it was like genuine. There's so many of them now, and people are so full of themselves, like you just don't have those kind of things anymore. At least it's not very common. And maybe you guys know some good ones or something, but I don't. I don't. We're reaching a point too, like, in the Bible talks about how there's wars, rumors of wars, that knowledge would increase, and it's like, all of these signs, these indicators, of the end of the age, that we're entering into the last days. And to me, I don't know, nobody knows like the day or the time or how long, any of this would go on. It's like, there's many people that believe that, and if you look at it like politically and all of this, like the elites, right? They whether you believe in the Bible or the, scripture and the prophecies or not, they do, right? They do. They're actually playing these things out in real time. They're trying to make them come about faster because they believe that they can actually bring about their Mashiach, right? That's what they're trying to do, is bring their Mashiach. They don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, by the way. They just believe he's a prophet. So they believe that they can bring their Messiah one of two ways. And one way is by everybody coming together and, loving one another and bringing heaven on earth, right? That's going to bring their Messiah that way. Well, obviously they think that that's pretty fucking impossible, and they're not going to try to go about it that way, right? I've never even seen them make an attempt to do it that way, honestly. So the other way is to, make the world so bad, right, that the Messiah has to come and like rescue us, basically. So that's why, you see all the wars and shit like that. That's why they're so bloodthirsty and, so ready to, constantly start conflicts and shit like that. And by they, I mean Israel. Yeah. And then you've got all of the Christians and shit like that absolutely fooled, into thinking like, oh, well, this political state, Israel, is actually God's chosen people. So we have to defend them, we have to protect them, we have to agree with them, right? Or we're going against God. Never mind all the fucking genocide and shit like that they're committing. It's like, whatever happened to we will know them by their fruits. Like, look at the fucking fruits, bro. Look at the fruits, This isn't God's chosen people. But matter of fact, there's also another thing that it says. It says that they are a synagogue of Satan, claiming to be Jews but are not, right? Anybody remember that one? What happened to that one? We ain't listening to that? We forgot that? Or what about what Jesus said, to the Pharisees and the Sadducees? He said, you are of your father, the father of lies. You got to think about like these hedonistic beliefs and shit that they have too, the whole 1,000 points of light and all of this, where they believe literally the way to ascend is to descend, and it's called like righteous sin or some shit like that. I shit you not. Go look it up. I don't know if I'm like I'm not saying, I don't know if I'm phrasing it exactly what they call it, but it's something like to that effect, like holy sin or righteous sin or some shit like that. Righteous transgressions. I don't know. And they believe that the best way to ascend is to descend. And this is where, and if we're going to sin, right, we have to sin against, the laws and the rules of God and, all of that, right? So the covenant of marriage is it's a covenant with God, where you're swearing an oath, you and your wife, before the Creator, right? So they have orgies, right? They swap wives, right? They believe in, sleeping with their young people too, That's taking innocence, And I believe I talked about this the other day when we were speaking of, like the satanic high priest, right? Whenever they do, hexes and all of that, like the most powerful, petition to Satan, is when you get rid of the little one in the belly, that they allow, actual high priest in those clinics, right? Because they have to get the blood on their hands, before they perform their rituals and rites, right? That's part of it, It's like, and this is what we're calling like the chosen, It's crazy. It's like you look at like the whole organ harvesting and all that as well. Like people, they traffic people in some countries like China and shit like that. They take what are they called? Euro something, starts with a U. It's also in my private videos. I did a private video on the organ harvesting. It's gruesome, dude. That was probably the one video I've ever done out of all the videos I've done over the years that really fucked with me the most. I got kind of emotional, when they were doing that to the kids, in that video. It was bad. It was hard. It's hard to watch. Yeah. Some of you guys will remember that if you were, there, like when I did that one. That one was rough. Yeah. bringing these children in, you know, which there's no telling what the kids have already done. It's like they find these, and think about like what they just found in New York, right? The tunnels and shit like that, right? Under that synagogue, you know, finding these tunnel systems. And there's tunnels in every fucking city in the United States, dude. There's tunnel systems here in Cincinnati, where I live. There's tunnel systems in probably the city that you live in as well. Guarantee it. You know, just look it up. You know, and these tunnels are used. And it's like, and back in the day, you know, they and this is what's crazy, they'll admit it. Most cities, like, you know, Seattle and shit like that, Portland, you know, they talk about their tunnels and that, you know, in a lot of port cities as well, especially a lot of port cities, that when, you know, they were using these ports and the rivers, and, you know, most big cities are built on like a body of water, like Cincinnati's on the Ohio River, right? Like, that men would come in off of the ships and the boats and all this shit, you know, and they would go into a lot of these bars and these saloons, you know, and whether they would get with like prostitutes and shit like that, you know, or they would get them drunk, you know, get a prostitute, and they would have trap doors, you know, in the rooms and in the bars and shit like that. You know, they'd knock them the fuck out with a club over their head, or Mickey their drink or whatever. And next thing you know, the trap door, drop their ass right underground. They're down there, they're fucked, right? They can't get back up. You know, and they would be in the tunnel system, and then they would take off the people's shoes, right? They would take off their shoes and put them in, like, you know, cells and shit, and they put broken glass and, you know, shit like that, basically, you know, all through, like, the hallway and around where they kept them. That way, if they, you know, did get free, they wouldn't be able to get very far. You know, because they were barefoot and they had all the broken glass and shit on the ground. You know, and then they would take them, you know, and traffic them, right? They would put them, you know, because it was, you know, ports and rivers and all of this, right? And they would put them on a boat, you know, crack ass at dawn. You know, sometimes they were still passed out or tied up or whatever, you know, and then they would traffic them, you know, to another place, and they would sell them into slavery, into prostitution, you know, or sacrifices, just all different types of things, you know. And this was not just you know, women and children. This was grown-ass men as well that this happened to, you know. And this shit still takes place to this day. You know, like I said in the video I did for my private video on Patreon, the organ harvesting one, you know, it's like in China, they go after that, what are they called? Euro somethings? Uruguays or something like that? I don't know, I'm saying it wrong. But they're basically like a monk class of people, right? They're like Buddhist or some shit, basically, you know, but, or a version of that, you know, they're religious. And they're the minority in China, you know? And, you know, they're basically labeled and targeted, this group of people. And it's like, you know, think about this. This happens in multiple countries. They take dissidents, right? People like you and me that they consider to be fucking domestic terrorists and dissidents and all of that. You know, people that are committing, you know, crimes against the government, if you will, you know, pissing the government off. You know, they'll take, influencers, you know, media personalities, all of this, dude. You know, you fuck with the government, you say the wrong shit, you expose the wrong shit, you know, you believe the wrong shit, whatever it is, right? You're on that list. You know, and they put them in, some of them get lucky and go to, you know, re-education camps, right? Which are in essence concentration camps. And, you know, they get re-educated where they, you know, they trauma-based mind control, right? They break their ass down and, you know, recondition them, right? To go along with the narrative and all of that. you know, but a lot of them, the ones that they say they can't condition, or not even just that, like they say that these people in China, that when they bring them into, you know, these re-education camps, that they actually, like, you know, they test their blood and, you know, all of this because they have a black market, you know, for organs, right? For organ transplants, you know? And it's like, in people that can't get a fucking, you know, a kidney or a heart or, you know, a liver or whatever in the United States will go over to China, you know, and you can pay 300 grand for a fucking kidney, you know, or a heart, you know, and get that transplant right then and there. You ain't got to fucking wait for it, right? If you got the cash, you can get it. You know, it's not the same as like here in the United States where you're on a list and all that, which, you know, we have a corrupt version of it too, which I'll tell you about as well. But, you know, so, you know, they take their specs, like I said, you know, they get their blood type and all of this, you know, and if they fit the description, the age, all of that for a donor, those people disappear, you know. They're taken to these facilities, you know, and they're killed. And I'm serious. If you haven't seen it, dude, I advise you to watch that video. It will change your fucking life, man. It will change your fucking life. That is the most pure evil. I thought I knew what pure evil was until I made that video. And then it's like, holy shit. You know? That was disturbing, you know, even to me. You know, I've never been more disturbed by something in my life. You know, they would kidnap children and they'd bring them to these facilities. And in these facilities too, man, this is the crazy part. Like, the people come in and they would have ropes and shit still on their hands and feet and shit. Like, you know, it's like they'd have all these people working in these factories too, you know, like, you know, removing their organs and, you know, preparing the bodies. You know, and it was like, it was just overflowing with bodies too. Cadavers, like overflowing. Like men and women of all ages and types. And like I said, a lot of them still had fucking ropes and shit on them. You know? And then in one, you know, and it's like, you think about like children that get sent to like children's services and shit like that. You know, which we know in like Pennsylvania, you know, they've been busted and among other places here in the United States, you know, for trafficking, you know. And then think about like the people that were connected to Hillary Clinton, you know, where they were setting up these foundations and shit in Haiti, you know, only to turn around, you know, and traffic all these kids, you know, and get busted for it too, you know, trying to bring all of them out. And, you know, according to, you know, the former head of the CIA, you know, he talks about how they go to a lot of these foreign nations and shit because they don't have birth certificates. You know, when you don't have a birth certificate, you already know what's going to happen. You know, you already know what's happening to one without a birth certificate. They're being thrown in the trash, dog. You know? If you think about like the Clinton emails and Pizzagate and all of that, right, where they're talking about the kids are in the hot tub and all this shit, you better ask yourself what happens to all of these people, you know, after the fact. You know, I mean, look at like the Clinton body count, right? There's literally like 100 fucking people that's worked for the Clintons that's mysteriously committed suicide. And a lot of times their fucking teeth are missing and everything after it happens. Like, you know, one dude shot himself and hung himself. You know what I mean? Like, how do you do that? How do you shoot yourself in the chest after you already hung yourself? You know? Like, make sure you're double dead. You know? And like the removing of their heads and teeth and all of this, it's just fucking, it's crazy. You know? And when you see the kids, man, like That's the thing. Like, that to me, that's the thing that bothers me the most is like how, how we're not like just fucking outraged. We should be storming, the fucking White House, literally, for the Epstein shit. We should. Trump saying like, you guys are still talking about that Epstein stuff. Yes, you're letting a fucking pedophile, like you're okay with pedophilia. You're trying to sweep the shit under the rug. And we all know that these were CIA and Mossad assets, that literally our own fucking government is participating in this. And this is the crazy shit, guys. Through this blackmail and like Roy Cohn, which was part of the Velvet Mafia, the gay mafia, right? That's who brought Trump up, So he's part of the blackmail ring. You got to think Donald Trump was even into all the pageants and Miss America shit, Miss Universe shit, right? All of that. That's a major recruiting ground to the models and stuff. Same thing that Epstein did, the modeling agencies and all of that, right? Except he was with Lex Wexner or whatever, right? Through Playboy. Or, Victoria's Secret, excuse me. Like, this is how they do it, man. This is how they do it. And, like Kevin Spacey and all these dudes, like, all of the, the Hollywood, it goes through talent agencies. Goes through talent agencies. This is how this happens. This is how it all works. Remember all the kids that they were placing on Wayfair and shit like that? Like, it'd be a picture of them, and these were missing children, and it would say, 10 fucking grand for a cabinet named fucking Sadie, And we're allowing this. We're allowing it. We're condoning it. We're condoning it. We're condoning it. And this is how we're selling our soul. Like I said, you don't always have to sign a blood pact and shit like that, But you might as well if you're going to go ahead and allow this kind of stuff, because when you compromise your morals, your values, your belief, like bit by bit, you're selling it, piece by piece, you're selling your soul. And that's kind of like how it happened to me, just to be all the way honest. It was like bit by bit at first. Bit by bit, for money, for women, things like that, bit by bit. And then you get to such a point where you're like, you've already compromised so much, right? That you're willing to go all the way with it. You're like, fuck it. I might as well just sign on the dotted line now. I've already done all of this. And, and I'm guilty as charged. So, and I've allowed people like that to sway me. I know how easily it can happen to a person. The honey pots and all of that, like those things are extremely effective. Extremely effective. Like they will use people, as your handlers. You will think they're your best friends. You'll think they're your girlfriend. You know what I mean? You'll think it's your coworker, right? And this is literally a handler the whole time. It's like, don't think that these people, that's why like, Kanye West getting threatened by his personal trainer, Britney Spears, all of this. It's because those handlers are right there. They're not going to let you get out of line. They're not going to let you, do too much, because if you do, that's when they're there to check you, and it's like they go, that's why we always see the same kind of playbook being ran, with me, it was character assassination, but it's like usually it's like that. It's character assassination, financial assassination, right? They hit my finances first, same thing with everybody else. They hit your finances first, right? Then they hit your know, your destroy your brand, your image, all of that. And if you continue and you persist, eventually they will kill you too, And depending on, and here's the thing, whenever we're dealing with the devil, so to speak, you're only as good as you always got to remember, it's a matter of time. The clock is ticking from the moment you make that deal, from the moment you get your 15 minutes of fame. The clock begins ticking then, because it becomes to the, eventually you're going to outlive your usefulness, is my point. And the moment you do, that's when it's time to get rid of you. Because then you're a liability. You're no longer an asset, you're a liability. You know too much. You've seen too much. It's time to get rid of you now. When they get rid of you, they'll make more money off of you anyways. It's like you're a movie director or, a songwriter or whatever. Well, they get rid of you. They're going to just own all the rights to the music you created or own all the rights to the films you made, And then you're going to be incredibly famous too. You're going to get more famous after you die, You're going to blow up. And then they're going to make money off of that. They're going to take all your little unreleased shit and start releasing it, long after you're dead. You'll be doing specials and dropping albums and all kinds of shit, And usually 9 times out of 10, like with Michael Jackson, there'll be some corrupt fucking manager or record A&R or whatever that's going to, fake some sort of signature that you signed your shit over to them, right? Not your family or whatever, right? That way they can own and control all your assets and your likeness, your image. And that's the thing. You got to think about the words too, like brand, right? Like a brand. What is a brand? You stick a cow with it, right? Cattle. A brand, it's a mark, right? It's a mark. You're branded, you're marked. Your property. That's why the whole thing when we come into this world, right? It's all like the maritime law and shit like that, right? Every, we're treated like the woman, it's all female vessels and shit like that. And we're the goods and services being brought into the, the world. We're being bonded and treated like goods and services through our, our birth certificate and all of that, right? The doctor, the sole of your feet, right? All of that, right? They create a corporate straw man, for your images, for your image in order to monetize your soul when you come into the system. You can't make this shit up, man. You can't make this shit up. And you got to think when all of this happened. I believe it's Dwight Eisenhower that started that. But before that, 1913, 1933 in the Federal Reserve, and from the gold standard, and then Nixon, in the 70s, all of it, man. Back in the day with the League of Nations with Roosevelt, and, and then it became the UN. This has been one long fucking slow burn to bring you into a satanic one world order. You know, putting metal caps in our, you know, or metal fillings in our mouth. You know, terrible for your brain. Terrible for your brain. Removing your wisdom teeth and shit, which is terrible for the nerves that connect to your brain. You know, fucking, you know, high fructose corn syrup and glyphosate and all this weird shit they're putting in your food. You know, that's why bread makes people fucking their fingers swell up and it's like so heavy and weird. You know, and the food in the United States is outlawed in 40 damn countries. You know, there's like so much birth control in the water, you know, from, you know, in street drugs and fluoride and all of these different things that are within the drinking water. You're a fucking fool to drink water out of the sink. You know, you're a fool. Then they wonder why, birth rates are so low and like people are becoming so fucking sterile. You know, not to mention all the soy and shit like that we're eating now. You know, like men ain't supposed to be eating that shit. You know, it reminds me of the Secret Covenant, right? The Secret Covenant. You know, where it talks about, you know, like, you know, big pharma and all this, and then like offering us a solution, but it's only making us sicker and sicker and sicker. And it's like, that's what's happening now, you know? Think about the nanoparticulates and all of the bullshit that's in the air, the smart dust and all of it, man. We're breathing all that bullshit in. It's getting caught in like the phalange of our lungs, you know? And what is it actually for? What is it actually for, you may ask? That smart dust and all that? Okay, I'll tell you what it's for. It's called IEEE. The 5G towers that they have, and they have one right over here, right behind my house. I'm probably getting cooked like a fucking piece of bacon at my crib, right? But it's because those 5G towers are even they're so close, and they got those big like flat panels and shit that go all the way around them because those are called repeaters, dude. Right? IEEE is actually how they tap into each one of our biorhythm, right? Our biological ether code, right? And you can Google it. You know, I'm on my phone here, but Google it, right? It's like 101.567, 101.568, 101.569. Like it's like 3 different ones, and they're just off by, you know, a tenth each. And it's like all of us have one of those codes. So the 5G towers are actually what they're using as a repeater is you. You're the repeater. And they're putting nanoparticulates and fucking smart dust in the air through the chemtrails, raining it down in your ass, right? Going in your water, going in the soil, going in your lungs, to alter your skin, to light you up with those microfibers to make you fucking a better antenna for the 5G, to make you a better repeater so you can transmit the signal. And remember, this is microwave, directed energy, right? What does microwave do? How do you cook something in the fucking microwave? You make water molecules rotate until they begin to heat up, right? Guess what? You're 80% water. The earth is 80% water. They can literally take 5G and 6G technology and read your brain activity through your skull. They don't even need your ass to, like, it's not even got to be invasive. Through your skull, they can read the fucking activity. They can literally take blue light, and that's why, you know, they have all the fluorescent lights and shit like that out in the cities and stuff. They have some of them here in Cincinnati, not where I'm at right now in this particular area on the west side, but they do have them. And they have them in a lot of cities, especially on the West Coast. You know, that fluorescent light. And remember, that's that bioluminescence, right? That luciferase bioluminescence, which is Lucifer the light bearer, right? You guys remember what that's from with all the quantum dots and all of that? You know, back when they were doing the old pokey poke on everybody? You know? You guys remember that? You know? Putting that old graphene in everybody, you know? With its magnetic properties to, you know, to jam up that pineal, which is the magnetic pole of your body. You know? Remember all that. And it crushed that spiritual antenna, but lit your ass up with all the other shit, right? That way you could be the artificial antenna. You know, the synthetic antenna. You know, and this is like the whole delta waves and shit like that. You know, which is sleep waves. You know? To put your brain in a sleep state so you're more suggestive. You know, you gotta understand, like, the wizardry. Like, these are warlocks on a level that most people can't even understand or fathom. You know? See, when you're into, you know, black magic and you're a warlock, you know, you understand that you are actively imposing upon the reality through colors and, you know, sacred geometry and, you know, numerical codes and all of that, right? And you can have the ability, you know, to influence and create stimuli, right? Insert stimuli in order to get a desired outcome, right? So if I wanted to hex you or curse you or, influence you in a particular way, you know, I only need a few things from you. You know, and most of it's publicly available, and you've given it to me, you know, probably through your Facebook and all of that. You've given all your data, your personal information, you just give it away. You know, they don't have to go searching for shit. You know? I just need your birth date. I just need your name. That's it. You know? That's all I need. Those two things, I can fuck your whole life up. I'll know all of your astrology. And because of that, I'll know what you're susceptible to, what energies you're susceptible to, and which ones, strengthen you. I'll be able to also see through your natal chart which days you're more susceptible to certain things. And through certain alignments, you know, through what's trined or squared or whatever, right? Like when the perfect time to attack you in a specific way is as well. And then according to that, I'll know what days to do it, you know, on Wednesdays and at 2 o'clock and all that, depending on the deity I want to use, which is the one that, you know, its particular archetype correlates to whatever it is I'm looking to do. You know, whether I'm looking to fuck with your money or hurt you physically or whatever, right? I'll know what day to do it, what time to do it, and when to send that demon at you. You know, and what demon to send, because I'll know which one you're most susceptible to. You know? And if I know your nationality and all that too, I can really start to play into things, right? Your geographic location, I can really start to play into things, right? And if I know your birthday as well, I know the numbers, you know? I know what numbers are your lucky numbers, you know? And I know which ones are going to give you problems. You know, it doesn't take much. And then I'll know the colors as well, which color candles to light, right? Which incense to use when I'm making the offering to the demon, you know, when I'm sending it to you. You know? And I'll know because of your different weaknesses and your different dispositions, according to your astrology and all of this, what type of demon to send that's most likely to succeed. Because you will be predispositioned towards certain things, right? You might have a predisposition towards sexual immorality or drugs or whatever, right? See, real magicians, real warlocks, it's very simple. And then if I get blood involved, it's all over for you, It's all over for you. I'll have a hold of your brain and never let go, and this is what they do to us, This is what they do to us. And they prime us too. It's like, oh, okay, and here's what's crazy. You get tired of being picked on and tired of being the, looking like a bitch, right, in the world. And, understanding like, oh shit, well, these elites are fucking me up, right? I'm sick of being on the losing end. I'm sick of being poor. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of that. I'm sick of having no bitches. I'm sick of whatever, right? So they're like, hey, we like the art that you create, or we think you're very handsome, or we think you're very pretty, or whatever, right? I'd like to put you in a movie, or, how about that book you wrote? Like, whatever, right? There's great potential here. Same exact thing. Right? But only this time, when they drag you in, right, to exploit whatever talent you have, right? Because you think you're about to get famous, or rich or whatever, and that's all it takes, people will open themselves up for greed and all those things, That's why pride goeth before destruction, And it's like, this is what's going to happen. It's like, and they know all the same things that I just mentioned before, the astrology and all of that, And what's wild about it is as they bring you in, from the moment you're doing a contract to the moment to everything they're speaking to you, they're going to do it in a specific order, using specific words, specific phrases, which are trigger words, right? And it's called priming. They're priming you with certain words, right? And I'll touch you in certain certain areas of your body correlate to certain things as well, right? See, this is how all of it works. People don't understand just how magnificent of creatures we are, and just how fucking, advanced, the human body truly is, in mind, body, and spirit. It's like, we are the most advanced piece of technology on the face of the earth. I can touch the bottom of your feet and be able to affect the organs in your body. This is just how we are. We're just amazing creatures, right? So say I want to invoke a certain thing. I'm going to use, certain words, neuro-linguistic programming, right? Words that evoke an emotional response, right? Whether I want to evoke use a word that has a negative connotation or a positive or whatever, right? And then when I use these trigger words and I prime you with them, I'm going to touch certain parts of your body every time I do it too, right? To get a certain feeling out of you, Have certain smells on me when I walk into the room. That way, every time you smell that, it brings you into the character that I'm creating, because I'm building altars within your mind, right? Alter egos. Right? And each one of these altars is a different personality. And this is happening to all of us on a massive scale. We don't even know it. That's why like television is so violent and shit like that. It's trauma-based mind control. Like, we are not meant to be violent, y'all. We're not. Sorry. You might like horror movies and shit like that, but, your brain doesn't know fake from real. It doesn't. So your brain is like, what the fuck? It gets all excited, you know, like, because it's seeing something scary and shit on TV, you know? And then because of that, whenever there's a traumatic event, you know, for one, this is why we have the memory of a goldfish, right? Because we have these electrical synapses firing in our brain, right? Firing back and forth. This creates, you know, these neurons create the connections for our memory. You know, so whenever we have a traumatic experience, right, it fragments that connection, right? And it goes from one connection from A to B and it splits into two, right? And then when it splits, it fragments, right? Fractals, right? Wherever it splits at, that's called an altar, right? It's called an altar. We've created a new point, right? And at that altar, you know, according to that traumatic event or that traumatic feeling or whatever, that's where you insert the programming. That's where you insert, you know, the word, the touch, the smell, and all of that, right? You build upon that altar, right? Now think about it. What are on altars? What are on altars? Idols. Take you all the way back to the beginning, huh? Like, so when I was talking about a phantom, a projection, an illusion, an idol, we were making the image of the Elohim, right? Image is a phantom, a projection, an illusion, an idol, right? Don't worship graven images, right? You're the image. The graven image is you because you are dead. You're in the system of death. That's why in the Garden of Eden they said, don't eat from the tree because surely you will die. That's why the Bible says, don't worry about who you can kill the body, but who you can kill the body and the spirit. Right? Twice dead. You're already dead once. Right? This is the system of death. The construct of death. That's the whole cube god, the black cube, the hippocampus and all of this in our brain that's responsible for speech and all of this, right? And the tongue has the power of life and death, blessings and curses, right? That's the Babel, right? Because we're speaking spells, right? That's why when we understand, we stand under the spelling of the word, right? Word magic. You know, we speak curses and blessings all over ourselves and everyone else. You know, that's why when we're watching television, we're listening to music, right? Music with the syncopated beats. Whenever you're invoking or chanting or anything like that, trying to bring a deity into the, you know, ethers, what do? You beat on drums. Syncopated, right? Same thing when you're listening to music, you know? And these frequencies are also tuning into certain parts of consciousness. Remember, you're a multifaceted, multidimensional being. You don't have to fucking be aware for me to tune into the different parts of you. That's why there is hidden symbolism in your television and shit like that all the time. You know? Because you ain't got to be aware that there's an all-seeing eye there. You don't. You don't got to be aware that there's a pentagram there. You don't. You don't got to be aware that there's an upside-down cross there. You don't. Your eye catches it either way. Whether you're aware of you're seeing it or it's hidden within, you know, a mirage of a, you know, or a collage of a whole bunch of other shit. Right? But your eye is still connecting with the image, right? And what is the eyes? The windows to the soul. You know? So your eye is picking up that image, right? And we're picking up that image, you know, which is a symbol. A symbol is a representation of an energetic frequency, right? It's an archetypical idea or persona as well. Right? So an image, a symbol, an image, right? So a symbol, and think about a logo, a brand, right? Like, see what I'm saying? Like, it all kind of starts coming back around full circle, and we see like what we're actually doing when we create, brands and logos and all this, like, we're creating entities. That's why corporations, right? Corpse, right? It's an entity. I mean, the United States is a corporation. Yeah? It's crazy. It's an entity. When we're continuing to, in all this is like magic at the highest level, too, that we're having, put on all of us. And it's like, people think they have an idea of what's actually taking place. Like, they have no fucking idea. They have no fucking idea. Like, Satan is the god of this world. And it don't mean like he's just kicking it here. He came down here and he's in charge. No, he made this motherfucker. Every bit of it. And every bit of it's, built as a trap. And that cube, think about that cube, right? And, we have Ouroboros, which is the cycle, right? It's a cycle, right? And we look at the celestial spheres, right? These are circles, right? Planets go in orbit, right? Circles, all of this, right? That's why there's nothing new under the sun. Everything gets a return. It's all cycling, circling, right? Spinning, right? Even your cells are spheres, right? They're circles, the heavenly spheres. But see, here's the thing, when you use a circle, whenever you're, invoking or evoking a spirit, right? A circle of protection, But if we want to trap energy, we use angles. Angles trap energy. When you think about cubes, right? The cube god, Kabbalah, right? Cube Allah, the cube father. Think about the Muslims and Islam and all of that, how they're, walking around, representing the rings of Saturn around the black and gold cube, Donald Trump Tower, right? In the shape of the 33 with the black and gold too, all of it. Like, they put it in front of every bit of it's right fucking in front of us for us to see, But whenever you like go into a room and you like turn a light on, you ever notice that, the first or the last place for the light, to leave, or the darkest space in the room is always in the corner where the angle is. It traps energy. And look like the old Tartarian buildings and shit like that. Notice like all of the architecture, the ancient architecture and structure, the Tartarian buildings are all like, it's all curved and shit like that. There's no angles in those buildings. None. No angles in those buildings. Because it allows energy to flow, energy to move. That's why everything that we have, like in our society now, is like us. We're born, in a box. In a box. We live in a house. It's a box. It's a cube. Your crib, your baby crib is a fucking rectangle. It's a box. You play in the sandbox, right, as a kid. You go to school, it's a giant box. You know? All of it. Hospital box. It's a box, but you sleep in a bed, it's a square, it's a box. Right? All of it. Your TV's a box. Right? And even when you die, you're put in a fucking box. You know? You know, and people are like, oh, I'm so awake. I'm so awake. I figured it all out, dude. It's like, yeah, really? You know, when you begin to truly understand, you realize you don't know a fucking thing. That is what you realize. You're like, holy shit, I know nothing at all. I know nothing at all. This place is fucking bananas. How could you ever know all of it? You know? And you think about, like, you know, God, and God wouldn't be shit if you were able to understand God within a physical limited lifespan, right? God wouldn't be shit. You know? Like, if I could figure God out here, then God wouldn't be shit. You know, so it's like we're not meant to understand God in this form. We're not able, we're not capable. You know, we're existing within the mind of God right now. Interesting. You know, and we're continuing, you know, I believe throughout all these different cycles, right? Throughout all the different cycles of humanity, you know, it's a process, an evolutionary process of us growing, you know. You think about the prophecy of Daniel, right? When it talks about, you know, the feet with, you know, iron and miry clay and all of that, right? Like, it's showing these different ages or aspects of mankind making this giant beast. You know? You know, if you think about, like, the feet, the iron and miry clay, right? Like, to me, that's man with machine. It's transhumanism. It's, you know, being a cyborg, a cybernetic organism, which is what we're on the verge of now. You know, it talks about how, you know, this mark of the beast, right? And, you know, like, think about the neural lace, right? These neural implants that they're trying to, you know, prepare all of us for. You know, putting the graphene inside of our body, you know, the nanobots, and, you know, it's like the hydrogel, you know, all of this. You know, this is the trans agenda, and we look at the age of Aquarius. Aquarius is that energy, by the way. First off, it's got the feminine aspect. That's why you see the whole girl power shit going on right now, right? Like, and second off, it is a technological sign, right? Aries is about technology. First, you know, it's a social sign as well. So it's about your social order, right? Or the changing of a social order or hierarchy. So it's like, that's why you see this reorganization of, you know, socially, right? Our system and all that's kind of like being reorganized, you know? And it's about the collective as opposed to the individual. And that's why you see everything kind of like shifting more towards, you know, the collective or the individual. Think about, like, social media. You know, it's all collective. Social media, it's collective. You know, collective consciousness, right? Christ consciousness. That's about the collective, right? Hive mind, right? That's collective. You know, and I promise you, you can believe or not, but every fucking time that we enter into an age, whatever the sign represents, you guarantee that that's what's going to be harnessed and the most prominent within that age. It happened in Pisces and it's happening now. It happened in Aries and it's happening now. It will not change. There's nothing new under the sun, right? And the sun being, this portal of pure, infinite awareness and light and life, right? And through the precession of the equinox, it is sitting in that particular sign. So it's harnessing the energy, right, of that zodiacal sign. That's flowing through that infinite awareness portal, into all of us. And the sun is pure information. We are artificial intelligence already. We're just organic, biological artificial intelligence. And I've told people that's why, your numerology, your astrology, your name, all of these things make up the algorithm of who you are. Like in Judaism, like your name, like they won't name their child after somebody who had a fucked up life, right? Say your fucking grandpa died of cancer or, stayed in prison his whole life or something like that. You don't name your kid after your grandpa then, right? That name is associated with some shit. And he'll carry that energy with him, You don't name them after biblical characters that had it rough either. Rachel or whatever. Nobody, they will not. You don't do that. Your name is your mantra, Your name is your mantra. Like for instance, my name is John, right? It's beloved of God. Gift of God, right? It also means brave, right? Shit like that. It's like that's the mantra of me as a being. Your surname as well. Same thing, Your life path harnesses, particular energy as well, right? That's how, when numerology comes into play, I'm a 33 life path, right? It's a master teacher and healer. Lo and behold, right? Like, I've spoke for a living for like fucking 10 years now. Like you can't make the shit up, man. Like we carry that energy with us. And that 33 energy is in me in so much. Like I was born on the 33rd parallel, 33 life path, right? Like just you can't make the shit up. And every one of us are like that too, by the way. Every one of us. We have like special attributes that make us who we are. And they say that our numerology number, our life path number, is an indicator of how mature we are spiritually and consciously as well, how many lives we've lived, right? Because we have the master numbers are 11, 22, and 33. 11 is influence, 22 is the builder, and 33 is the master teacher. And a 22 has the power of the 11 and the 22. So the 33 has the power of the 11, the 22, and the 33. That means like it's an ascended master. It means, you're ascended or you have ascended. It's probably your last lifetime. I hope so. I hope it's my last life here, but I don't feel like I've lived other lives, I really don't. And I don't really see anything in the Bible that talks about, reincarnation other than John the Baptist, saying that he was Elijah, right? So, there are some indicators that, perhaps there is, that we have lived other lives in the past. I don't know about you, what you believe or what you think when it comes to that, but, But if you think about time in general, you know, time is an illusion. It's a human construct, right? Like, and that's why, you know, Satan, that cube god, once again, right? Which I believe, you know, the cube, I believe we're in a quantum computer, is what I believe, actually. You know, some sort of quantum computer simulation, you know, that this evil fucking entity has created and trapped us in. You know, think about D Wave, right? D Wave has to be kept deep underground. Think about the Fallen, right? The Book of Enoch, right? God removes the light from them and covers them and buries them in rocks. Basically, you know, they got to go underground, right? Think about all the Darren Kuyu and all these underground, you know, cave systems and cities, right? And we were talking about the underground cave systems and shit like that for the trafficking and all that as well, right? Underground. Think about the Hopi and all of that, right? And their ant people, you know, that saved them from the cataclysms, right? You know, so underground. Underground, you know. And when the Bible in the book of Revelation is talking about the destruction of the earth, it says, you know, everyone that was, you know, destroyed, you know, on the earth, above the earth, and beneath the earth. So it's like, yeah, there's multiple shit going on here. You know, Sheol was described as like, you know, inside the earth. You know, you think about Admiral Byrd and the, you know, the concept that, you know, with Lupus Negra, right? The hollow earth and all of this, you know. There's so many different things to fathom and kind of think about and consider. And it's like everything that we've been taught is a lie. So like, to me, I don't rule any fucking thing out. You know, it's like, I honestly, I can't like, you know, go on about myself and like think like, okay, well, you know, that's just impossible. I got to rule that out. You know, I can't rule it out. You know, I feel like everything, like, you know, it derives from like some place of truth, at least. And it's got some truth in it. Hey, Paolo, Chris Wright, Bradley. You know, if you think about too, like, us to be able to maintain balance, right? We're electromagnetic beings, right? The magnetism is negativity. That's, you know, that's the pull, you know, and the electricity is the energy. That's the light. That's, you know, that's the push. That's the protrusion, right? And it's the masculine and the feminine, you know, and it's like God, electric, right? Elohim, right? And think about archangels, like electrical arc. You know, Ark of the Covenant, all of this, right? You can tell this is energy, right? And even think about like Zeus and Thor, right? And their thunderbolt and all of this, you know. You know, energy is very prominent, you know, within our reality. And, you know, that's, you know, everything is energy, right? That's why nothing can be created nor destroyed, you know. It just simply changes form. You know, but we need that charge, right, from the Creator in order to, you know, to be everything that we have the ability to be. And it's like, when we have that, when we're full of that light, you know, that light is what actually activates us. You know, so many people have like bought into the, you know, the lie, the hocus pocus of the whole, you know, the new age nonsense, you know, that woo woo bullshit. You know, and it's like they believe that, you know, they can just do exercises, like, you know, and they can raise their vibration and consciousness to such a high state, you know, and you can elevate it in somewhat. And you can't open your Kundalini, you know, and you got to think like the Kundalini opens in more than one way. That's why there's so much of the gay shit, you know, within those secret societies, like in Bohemian Grove. They're all banging each other in their ass, right? It's because the vagus nerve, right, in your asshole, right? Anal sex. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? Sin City, you know, get it? You know, Sodom and Gomorrah, get it? You know, it's part of the initiation. That's why, you know, the pedo shit like that. It opens up their kundalini when they get tapped in the trapdoor. You know, it also does something to them too. You know, it takes their man card. You know, they say that's why a lot of people, you know, celebrities and shit like that end up committing suicide. You know, because, you know, that's the ultimate act of domination, right? For one, you know, if you do it to a girl, you know, you're like, you know, if it's your girlfriend, you're doing it to like show her like I own you type shit. You know what I mean? Like it's a mental thing. You know. Same thing if like, you know, one male was doing it to another, and that's what it is. It's like a hierarchical thing within their little clubs. You know, it's like, no, you bend over and take it from me, right? I'm the alpha. I'm the big dog. Yeah. You know, you got to think like they got that, you know, the prostate up there and all of that. So it's like there is a biological or anatomical aspect to all of this, right? And, you know, that vagus nerve being tripped, which is opening up that kundalini, which is allowing them to be opened up spiritually, right? So those energy centers are, you know, they're open and exposed, you know, and it allows them to be able to feed off of that energy, right? Or entities to feed off of that energy, you know, and it's like, I believe homosexuality in particular, you know, that act, you know, I'm not knocking anybody, whatever you're into, you know, I don't hate nobody or anything like that. Like, I don't care what other people do. But I am just being honest with you. I do believe it's a demonic act. You know, I believe it accesses demonic energy within people when they participate in that particular act. You know, very extremely demonic and perverse, right? Extremely demonic. You know, and you got to think nerves, right? The vagus nerve, the nervous system, right? It's the electrical wiring of the body, you know. So it's like allowing energies to flow in particular ways. And, you know, whenever we fuck with that energetic system, you know, we throw it off. We're redirecting the way that the energy flows within the body. We're, you know, when we redirect the energetic flow of the body, it's changing the chemical composition of us too. You know, so it's changing us on a fundamental, you know, on a fundamental level. You know, they say like some men, when they have that done, you know, they can't even get erections anymore after it happens to them. You know, that their cock stops working. You know, and think about that too. I just want to kind of point that out as well. You know, if you think about now in today's society with all like the erectile dysfunction and shit like that, you know, as a male, your penis is your antenna. You know, it lets you know your spiritual and your conscious health. You know, that's why like, hey daddy. Okay. It's funny. But, you know, the penis is the conscious antenna, you know? So when it's like standing straight up at attention, you know, erect, strong, right? It's showing you that there's no blockages in the flow of your energy. And like when dudes can't get their shit to work, right? It's because they have blockages within their chakras and shit like that, and they're leaking energy in particular places. You know. And if you think about it, there's like this epidemic of, erectile dysfunction and shit like that in society. So it's like showing you like this is a bunch of spiritually sick people. That's your vitality. It's like, as a male, that's your vitality. Your life force, your ability to procreate, your ability to, testosterone and, like all of that. Like, it's like without that, you're not even a man, Jesus by Kundalini must be open wide. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. Like with the whole Kundalini thing, we got to think it's serpent energy. Like when you think about the serpent, like in the Nagas and all of this, like the dragon, serpent, it's all the same thing, right? The feathered serpents, plumed serpents, all of it. It's all satanic energy in essence. It's like that's what Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, all the different, mysticism, all of it, Gnosticism. These are all just different forms and variations of, the left-hand path is you trying to, use metaphysics to access the kingdom of heaven within the, why you're here, It's like you're trying to activate your body and align your chakras and your energy and strengthen your aura and, your chi and all of that, right? Like in order to access all of your gifts, right? It's like, it's like turning on the ship, turning on the vehicle, having the keys to the car. It's like trying to access heaven, the heavenly realm and all your spiritual gifts, like in the physical while you're here. And so it's like, instead of like depending on Christ, right, on Jesus, and asking, for forgiveness, and it's like tapping into the frequency that is God, and doing that, like allowing that to like flow through you, harnessing that. And allowing that to bring you, to remove the scales from your eyes and give you the eyes to see and the ears to hear and, build the hedge of protection around you and put on the armor of God and, all the different things that it offers, right? With that double-edged sword from your mouth, right? Like all of it, It's beautiful, like what can come from that, that archetypical energy by, by speaking that name, right? That name has power, right? Yahweh, Jehovah, right? Yeshua, right? Jesus, right? These are powerful, powerful names and utterances, right? They embody, words are the same thing as a symbol, right? Like they symbolize an energetic archetype, an energetic frequency through a sound. The vibration is the expression. Just like an image or a symbol is it's a visual expression. But we're trying to do a shortcut to that whenever we're doing, with the occult. We're trying to do a shortcut to that. We're trying to play God. We're trying to open ourselves up, tap into our gifts, and we're exalting ourselves. And that's why it's do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It's you placing yourself on the throne just like Satan did. It's like my will be done. Like F God, my will be done. Like that's what it is. Within the occult. And the occult just means hidden, right? Like, so these are the hidden things. These are the depths of Satan. And think about, Hermeticism. Hermetic means sealed, It's sealed. It's kept away from the public, kept away from the masses, and that's why they call all the people that don't have that knowledge, right? They're the profane, You know, the profane. They're disgusting, you know, with their own filth, right? They're ignorant, right? They don't, you know, they're spiritual crap, spiritual dog shit. You know, that's how they look at you. You're called a useless eater. You know, it's like you haven't been initiated into the mysteries, right? Like, and without that initiation, then you haven't been raised, right? And if you haven't been raised, that means you haven't been brought back from the dead, you know, and brought back into the light, you know, brought back into the light, like you know, in most cases, right? It's like the true light of Lucifer, like the light bearer, you know, the light bearer, you know, Prometheus, yeah, who brought those 50 divine sparks, and then you wonder why the United States flag has 50 stars on it, you know. But, you know, I digress. You know, it's like, you know, we all through that double helix, we have that battle of good and evil within us every single day, every single moment. You know, we're fighting that war. You know, and the war is within ourselves for the most part. You know, but there are external influences as well, you know, and it's like, you know, I hate to tell you, it's like the wrong ideologies and thoughts. Just remember, I told you earlier, just like your eyes locking into it, you know, your brain connects with the frequency. The spell begins to work on you just by you looking at it, just by you hearing it. You know? You know, once you know, you can't fucking unknow. Once you know, you can't unknow. You know? And that's what the occult does to people. You know, it steals your innocence. You know, we're like children, you know, before we know the mysteries and the depths of Satan. You know, I was like a child, and I lost that. You know, I lost that innocence. You know, and it's like, and that's why it says in the Bible to remember your first love, right? Your first love is God. You know, your first love is, you know, like also it's, and not like the weird woo-woo way of loving yourself. I hate all that shit with the new age. Love yourself, da-da-da-da, put yourself first, you know, and trying to teach you how to be a selfish sack of fuck. You know, and it's like, actually, you know, the Bible, God is in service to everyone, right? God doesn't serve himself at all. You know, he serves everybody. He's a slave to all of us. Our beck and command. He's creating everything for us, answering all of our prayers. We don't do shit for him. Jesus sacrificed himself. It's like, so when you hear like those new age concepts of like, you know, putting yourself first and love yourself first, it's like people don't understand how perverse and twisted these concepts are. It's like how fucking wrong they are and how stupid you sound, you know, while you're regurgitating this shit, right? You know, you're making an excuse to be a selfish bastard. You know, just the same way by like, I'll create my own reality and I don't allow a negativity. And no, you're making an excuse to bury your fucking head in the sand. You know, you did the same shit before you were awake. Now you're just making an excuse to do it, you know, and try to make it, you know, and this is what you call spiritualizing the ego. You know, you're not truly awakened. You're not truly enlightened. You're not truly, you know, righteous. You know, you've become a doer of iniquity. You know, you believe, you know, you've exalted yourself above God. You placed yourself on the throne. You know, and you can't see the forest for the trees. You know, that's why you got to buy the gold refined in the fires of affliction, right? That's why God corrects the ones he loves. He takes his net and he gathers his together, refining them by the fires of affliction. You know, we're tested. And that's what this is. The last days, the end times, the end of the age, the end of the cycle. It's a test. You know, it's like who got the message, who learned, who read the fucking book and studied this time. You know? Did you do your homework? You know? Did you pick it up? Did you get the picture? Are you following the fucking crowd and doing what's trendy? You know? They talk about this great falling away and all this, and it's like, you know, and I'm telling you, you know, it says, and if it were possible, they would deceive even the very elect. You know? And it's like, I was deceived. I have fallen away. It got me too. It's so convincing. It sounds so good and so believable. And everybody is like, you know, it sounds so intelligent, so progressive, and just like, you know, it's like it's hard not to buy in. But it's not true. It's not the truth. It's not the truth. Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. You know, and there's only, you know, one God, and that's the source. The Father, Yahweh, Jehovah, right? Adonai, the creator of all things. So, hopefully, you guys got something out of this one. You know, hopefully. If you have not, consider donating to the channel, supporting the channel. Join me over on Patreon, and it's patreon.com, Best Damn Podcast Official. You can join for free. I've got a few things on there for free, but you know, I've got I believe like if you do 25 or more, you get like free coffee mug, t-shirt, hoodie, shit like that, which is pretty cool. You know, I actually pay for it and don't make it come out of your stuff. And you know, check out the human trafficking, the organ harvesting, and you know, the fake, you know, capital shit. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of uncensored content, you know. And then I've got some of my greatest playlists, you know, the end of the simulation, the forbidden occult. I mean, like just my best work. The mysteries of the God series, like just, you know, these are the deepest dives, the greatest work I've done, in my opinion, you know, and it's series after series. You know, if you don't want to join on Patreon, you can also donate, Cash App, money sign, Best Damn Podcast, or paypal.me/the Best Damn Podcast, all lowercase. Or you can go through Facebook Messenger Pay, like the Messenger, and it's facebook.com, John Keane, Best Damn Podcast. I put all those links in the chat, and they're all in the description as well. And I also pin everything at the top of the comment section, you know. And they banned me on TikTok. I hit 10K on TikTok. I had got 1 million views on one of my videos. I was doing really well. So I did appeal. So we'll see if I get it back. I have 2 strikes on my main YouTube channel right now. What else? They shadow banned me on my Facebook account, the one with 25,000. They get shadow banned on that one. And they demonetized one of them. I'm trying to think. There was something else that happened too. Oh, and they removed, you know, I did a video about Jews or whatever, you know, something about Jewish people, you know, and they took it down on X. I get slammed everywhere, dude. Everywhere. You know, that's why I have, you know, like 2 Facebook accounts, 2 YouTube accounts, 2 TikTok. Like I have to, because they, you know, they removed me out of the iTunes store. I had fucking hundreds of thousands of downloads. It's just, I've had to start over so many times. It's not funny, you know. But it's because of the content I talk about. It's because of the stuff I talk about, You know, they don't want you to know these things. This type of information is lethal, dude. It's lethal, you know. This is iron sharpening iron. You won't hear this shit from nobody else. You know, I haven't, you know, anywhere. So you might hear some of it sprinkled here and there, but not to this depth and to this extent, you know. So if you appreciate what I do, you appreciate my work, like I said, please donate, support, and give. I desperately need it right now. They've slammed me on everything, so I appreciate the love. Share my videos, share the links, subscribe, and when you subscribe, also, you know, click the notification bells. Make sure, you know, to go and subscribe to all the channels. YouTube.com, Best Damn Podcast Official. YouTube.com, Best Damn Podcast. Facebook.com, Best Damn Podcast. Twitter, The Real Best Damn. Instagram, Best Damn Podcast. You know, all of it. All of it, all of it, all of it. I'm good. Got the city bus trying to pick me up here, guys. But you know, like, you know, and like keep your head up and like keep trying to, you know, keep trying to affect the world, like for real. Keep trying to affect the world, you know, like in a positive way. You know, like we got this, you know. So you want to book readings too? 513-393-2396 or email therealbestdampodcast@gmail.com. Reach out, contact me too. I'd love to hear your thoughts or whatever. All right, guys. So remember, Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. God bless you all. I love you, and I will see you next time. Peace. Make sure to comment too, guys. All right.